Hello guys, welcome to the channel. Today we will be installing the BMF ROX 5.5 inch spring over axle lift kit for the Mahindra Roxor. This is what the finished product looks like. This is when I was doing the install far ahead with the procedure. So we use the bobcat to lift up the Roxor, and it has to go ways up. So to make that happen, I used an old pallet on each side of the Roxor to be in order to hold the vehicle high enough from the ground. And then took off the tires. Usually this would be one of the first steps you do. You get the bolts loose, the nuts loose, and then you jack up the vehicle. So my editing skills are not the best. Basically what you do is you take off the steering component, you take off the front spring, and then you drop the axle, take off the propeller shaft. You will rotate the axle on jack stands, and then you file away on the passenger side so that you should be able to fit the purchase upon which the spring will rest. And once you have a good fit, then you just go ahead and reinstall everything like it was before. You have to drill a hole on the Pitman arm. That's the Pitman arm on the steering. I believe it's a 5/8. You just resize that hole, make it a bit wider to take a 5/8 bolt. The same thing happens with the steering mechanism. Right where you have the tie rod, you will also have to resize those holes, make them to fit the 5/8 bolt that comes in the kit. It's also worth pointing out that there are longer brake lines that come with the kit, so you would have to take off the brake line and replace it with the longer brake line. I'll show both of them side by side at some point in this video. So this is what the Roxor would look like after the lift kit is completely installed. You can see it sits much taller than it was before. You have the new Heim joint right there at the tie rod ends, and these are very high quality and beefy materials that I used to build this kit. So I'm very impressed with the build quality. So the front end was a little bit more involved compared to the rear, just because you have a few more components to disassemble. But once you have everything taken apart, like you'll see shortly here in the video, you drop off the front springs, you support the axle on jack stands, you disconnect the brake, you take away the Pitman arm, well, not the Pitman arm, the drag link and the front connecting rod, or tie rod, not connecting rod. Connecting rod is in the engine. Once you take all of those components, then you have a free open space where you can actually work easily. At this point, I had just taken off the brake line on the right, on the driver's side, and you can see the hydraulic fluid dripping. And there I'm just looking for an appropriate place to put the jack stand in order to take off the spring. And it is recommended before you start this job to do your best to have the steering wheel centered and the wheels pointing straight ahead. It just makes it so much easier when you go to put everything back together. Your alignment might be off, but you get it pretty close if you have the wheels pointing straight ahead. So most of this is just repetitive, but one of the reasons I did that was people had so many questions. Here you see the brake lines. On the right is the new brake line, and on the left was the old brake line. Most questions, and even I myself, I was a bit stumped. I didn't know how the components were supposed to get go back on the Roxor. So most of these images you see, some might be repetitive, but it's just because I want to give different perspectives on how the components come together. That's the brake, and that's the new brake line installed. So it's just a slow process. The instructions that come with the kit, they're very clear and concise. You just have to follow the process step by step as enumerated in the manual. That is the breather line for the front differential. And at this point I had one of those bolts on the spring which was too long, so my spring wasn't sitting well on the perch, and I had to cut it like you see in that picture. You have to make sure your spring sits flat and flush on the perch, otherwise something is wrong. Take it apart and find out exactly what's going on. I really like the end result, but I think I need bigger tires. And at the end, using the stock wheels and tires, the height to the body of the Roxor itself, that panel right there is about 26 inches if I am not mistaken. So you have just roughly about 26 inches. And when you put on bigger tires, of course you will gain a few more inches in height. So those are the old components compared to the newer ones. That tie rod and the drag link, they really look they look so much more smaller, not as beefy as the other one. This extra bolt, it's supposed to go where you have the Pitman arm, through the Pitman arm to the drag link. I reused the old one, but I'll be switching it out at a later date because the one that is supplied with the kit is so much more beefy and looks more durable. That was an easy way to not use the jack. The bobcat just made it so much more easier, especially as I had to go so tall with the Roxor in order to have the clearance to install the kit. So this is during the dismantling phase. There's that castle nut with the lock pin that holds the tie rod ends and there's a special tool that you use to pop out the tie rod, but in my case I did not need it. The Roxor is still relatively new. There wasn't any rust or anything binding, so it popped out quite easily. But here I just demonstrate how you should use the tool. You put it there, whack it with a hammer, and your tie rod end should pop out easily. Mine just came out easy. I didn't even need to use that tool. Those will not be reused, so lay them to the side. You also have to disconnect the sway bar because you are relocating the plate to which the sway bar is attached at the bottom. It's gonna come to the top and reside on top of the spring. And you also have to disconnect the propeller shaft like I did right there. They recommend when you turn the front differential over to close that breather hole on top of the differential so you don't lose your differential oil. So this is just looking at the front differential. It's been disconnected, but then I think I used like a little tool to pry the shaft away from the differential. And that is the brake line. You have that banjo bolt right there, which you take out, and then you can free the line just like that. Be careful, there's two washers there. Make sure you don't lose those. And also, hydraulic fluid is very corrosive. You do not want that on your paint. At the end of this process, you'll have to bleed your brake lines. The ones in the rear were not disconnected, but I would highly encourage you to go ahead and bleed the whole system. Remember, when bleeding the brakes, to always start from the one that's farthest from the brake cylinder reservoir under the hood. Here we take off the second banjo bolt, and again we watch out for those two copper washers. Brake fluid is very corrosive, just remember. So I'll be careful not to touch my paint with those gloves. So if you look at the bolt coming through the spring, you can see here I have it cut to make sure it fits on the hole in the perch. Here we have the sway bar disconnected, and this is just another look. It's darker, but another look at the bolt. You see it's much longer than it should be, and that's the vent on top of the differential. I believe this was taken earlier. In the process, you can still see I had the springs on, but the front part of the springs, where the shackles go, had been I had removed the bolts that hold it in place. And you can see the vent for the differential. You just pull out that tube on top. So the process took me, I would say, I started late one afternoon and went into the night, got to the point where I had to do the grinding, and just didn't want to make too much noise late at night. So I left it at that and I continued the next day. So the manual for this lift kit calls on you to roll the front axle completely over after you would have blocked the vent on the differential, so you don't lose your lubricant inside. But I found that I could rotate it to about where it sits right now, and that gave me enough access to go in there and grind down the area that I had to in order to make the perch fit. So that's the position in which I had the axle when I started doing the grinding. And the grinding is going to be on the front, well, on the passenger side. I guess I'll have it close up around where you have the center of your screen right now. Yeah, somewhere there. So I have the grinder, got an extension cord, and right there is where you do the grinding on the, yep, right there, the center of your screen. That way you have enough room for the perch to sit comfortably and level, and also for the C clamp that goes all the way to the top to also fit there. So remember, the perches are all labeled. You have the right, and then you have the left, you have the front, and you have the rear. So the difficult one is the front right, which you can see right there. So the last image you just saw, I had already started the grinding process and measured the perch over and over, and there you have the perch fitted. And again, you try not to have the bolt go through the perch on top, because that's where the spring has to sit, and it has to sit flat and flush. So that's what it looks like with both perches installed. Those are the new brake lines. So here I finished the install. Just want you to take a moment, look at the orientation of that plate. Now the plate sits on top of the spring, and then the spring sits on top of the perch. And then you use those your C clamps or U bolts, whatever they are. The U bolt, you use those and then secure the spring to the perch. And that's how I did my install. Sorry, I didn't have a play-by-play sequential video, but it was just to show you some of the steps I had to take in order to install the lift kit. Here is the Roxor, here is the final product. Here here's what it looks like. And I'm very happy so far with the kit. Haven't taken it out to any trails yet, but hopefully that should be soon. Just do a quick walk around. So it gives you an idea of what to expect if you want to lift your Roxor 5.5 inches. And I am pretty sure it will get higher in case I swap out the tires, put on some bigger tires. I'm running 2.5 inch wheel spacers with my current setup, and those are some of the instructions from BMF ROX. Clear, concise instructions. It's very helpful, and they also have diagrams to show where all the various parts go. So there we have the new tie rod in place. And the tie rod ends, of course, you can see these are the Heim joints that are used, and no longer the ball type that were there previously. The rear is also complete. Everything is tied. Looks awesome. I don't know whatever happened to my shock, but I just saw that it was damaged. It had that little bump when I went down to do the install of the lift kit. It's kind of weird because I haven't really been like hardcore off-roading with the Roxor, but stuff happens. And I guess enough of looking into the wheel well. You can see where the e-brake cable goes on the outside. That's what the rear looks like. During the installs, you have to make sure you verify, check and check again. Make sure that those perches are sitting snug and tight where they have to be. And another look on the driver's side this time. And the front. Everything checks out. And note the position for at the plate. You have the shock and also the sway bar. They are both reconnected back to the plate. You have the new brake line, which is quite long. It seems to almost be touching the tire, but I'll hold it back in place with. I'll look for a means of securing the brake lines up front. We have the spring secured. And well, that's about it, and that's just the Roxor driving. Little test drive. I still don't have the alignment perfect. But one benefit I kind of noticed, if you look, you see the rocks are turning like really tight. So the steering has vastly improved. Hopefully I'm not messing up with anything there, but yeah, the steering is way, way, way better than what it was before. You can turn almost like on a dime. It turns really tight right now. And that's all what I had for you guys. Sorry it was such a long video with very not too much detail, but again, it's just to give you an idea of what to expect when you are doing this lift on your Roxor. Thanks for watching. See you guys on the next video.